Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning here tonight to chat about this new Deftones album, Ohms. Sacramento-based art metal titans who got their start in the late 90s after a sort of rocky start that I've never enjoyed, their Adrenaline album, but ever since they have been on one of the best and most creative metal album streaks in recent memory, honestly. 1997's Around the Fur was this just gritty, angsty classic with some really great deep cuts. Then we have, of course, White Pony, which is one of the greatest alternative and art metal albums I've ever heard. The gloomy yet aggressive Saturday Night Wrist, the shoegaze inspired Diamond Eyes, and while I thought I would hate it, I honestly adored every second of Koi no Yokan. Now, they have made one or two albums that I have not really enjoyed that much. Like I said before, was never a big fan of Adrenaline. And honestly, I really don't like the production, a lot of the songwriting on their self-titled album. And their last album, Gore, just was not for me at all. However, personally, I've enjoyed a lot of these new singles. Let's chat about this thing. This album starts off with Genesis, one of the teaser tracks, and I've loved this track ever since I first heard it. For a more electronic tinge of a track from Deftones, this is great. That one lone synth is so cool, especially because when everything else kind of pummels its way in, it's pretty glorious. It almost reminds me of stuff from their Diamond Eyes album. Actually, there is some shoegaze influence in here, but I think it's just enough of a gut punch, and with a sheer amount of emotion that only Deftones can bring to the table, makes this track really work. It's a great call to arms, remind you who the Deftones are. And you know what? There are a couple of seconds here that are just a little too slow for my liking, but overall, as an intro, this is great. However, I will say this, there are a ton better tracks on here. For one, I'll take Ceremony over the intro any day. This track rips. The production is fantastic. I love how bulky it is. The pacing here is genius. It's also incredibly hypnotic, which is something I've always loved about Deftones' work. But for me, it's always a sort of human aspect of Deftones music that makes me come back again and again. I mean, this is a gloomy, intense, industrial-sized metal tune, but Chino Moreno's vocals and lyrics time and time again give it this sort of human aspect at the center of it that is just really staggering. Urantia, on the other hand, is one of the heavier tracks here, but I honestly needed that right now. Don't worry, it's just as pensive and brooding and grisly. It's got some real teeth to it, and honestly, Deftones sound great. How gritty the riff is, and just how booming this chorus is after all that. This is great. To be honest, they sound like themselves more than I figured they would. It's a very natural sound. Like, if a couple of years back I was trying to picture Deftones' sound in 2020, this is probably along the lines of where I figured it would be. And speaking of seriously gritty, nasty sounding tracks, Error is awesome. Looming riff that we get during these verses is so volatile. This track just sounds like it could just jet off at any minute. Once again, Deftones have this way of bringing in a more melodic sound when it is needed the most. For me, it just makes their sound resonate with me so much more. I don't know about you, but this track, this sound works for me quite a bit. And some of the shoegaze elements and the breakdowns in the final minute are glorious. Now, I wish I could call this metal album of the year, or even the best Deftones album I've heard in the last, 10 years, but there are some stinkers on here. Peggy, I honestly think should have just been left on the shelves entirely. I don't think as far as the writing aspect goes, this is bad, but it's just not nice sounding at all. The mixing here is awful. It sounds like it's going to crack one of my speakers every time I put this on. Chino's vocals literally sound like they're going to rip right through my headphones, and not in an exciting way. Also, the extended ambient finale is actually really nice and interesting, but I think it should have been its own separate entity and expanded on. I have a lot of the same feelings towards Radiant City. Once again, the writing here isn't that bad, but from a production and mixing standpoint, this sounds really bad. It's harsh and it's messy, but once again, it's not done in a very exhilarating way. I mean, overall, this is a very good album from Deftones, but when it's bad, it's pretty bad. And Headless, for me, is tough. I like the, once again, approach to this ambient sound here. I like that. This track has such a vastness to it, which is pretty cool. But the track that this eventually becomes with these ridiculously outdated chugging guitars just isn't for me. Compared to so many other tracks here, this to me is just not the complete package. It's a shame because I think Chino's performance here is one of his best. He sounds legitimately dangerous. But between the directionless approach and these instrumentals that are just subpar, this track is not for me. But there are some mid and late album real gems. For my money, The Spell of Mathematics is probably the best track here. I love the sonic guitars on this track. They sound freaking awesome. It's so simple. This is Deftones by the books. But how many bands are sort of approaching with the same formula that they did 20 years ago in 2020 and still sounding this good? It's not that many. Dual vocals are great, and the pacing here remains absolutely masterful. It's so dreary, it's so emotional. I love those wailing synths. This is great. And with The Link Is Dead, Deftones kind of do something I didn't see coming. They take their blend of art metal and alternative metal and bring in synthesizers, which they've done a lot of here, but they do it without making it overly cheesy or ridiculous. This track goes in a heavier direction, but in all the right ways. Once again, if I had to choose a track here that I would say is kind of a definitive classic Deftones sound, I'd have to point to this one. But I mean that in all the best ways. This very brooding verse, these cataclysmic, very aggressive choruses, it is so good. And the title track, Ohms, as a finale, is freaking awesome. I think it's actually one of the best tracks here, if not the best track here. This is just all around fantastic. It has excited me since they dropped it a couple of months ago. It's easily the most triumphant and epic track here. Send their listeners home happy. This was great leaving this off to the end. For what it's worth, it's also the catchiest track here. But more than that, it just wraps up this album really nicely, brings together a lot of themes and thoughts and just a lot of last minute details. I love this. So I'll be honest, after Gore a few years ago, I almost wrote Deftones off never to return to their music ever again, at least not their new stuff. However, they do a lot of really cool shoegaze influence, some synth-infused metal here that actually sounds pretty good for a band on their 9th or 10th album. Overall, this is a pretty decent album. Yes, some of the mixing and the production on a few tracks here is pretty sloppy, and I don't know, just not what I look for in a Deftones album. But overall, this is very solid and just another very consistent album from Deftones. I'm feeling a strong 7 on this album, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you like the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.